Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, April 26th is a big day. It's a Pennsylvania primary. We'll have a primary review, election review. But first, it's back on the table, medical marijuana, plus how are the schools faring? Stay around for Pennsylvania Newsmakers. It all starts after the break.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. Well, joining me to discuss the issues that are in front of the legislature and in front of the school districts, Mary Wilson. She's the Capitol reporter with Pennsylvania Public Radio, and Robert Swift with Times-Shamrock newspapers. All right, Robert, you have covered the medical marijuana proposal since almost time immemorial. It seems like they've been coming up. Senate passes it, passes one version, the House passes another version, it's back in the Senate. Let me start with a bit. What are the prospects that this is going to become law?
I mean, I think they're good that both chambers have passed it. The House vote was key. Now we're in the ping pong stage.
I like that
and,
ping pong.
And this is where I think it's hard for the public to follow, whereas each one may have its own version and is trying to keep what it wants. And one of the things that the Senate has raised some concerns about the House bill, there's some concerns about whether it's be so strict that it may not be available to a lot of people, readily available because of the doctors participating. One of the things that they're doing here, which is difficult, this is just like casinos 12 years ago. Pennsylvania is creating a whole new industry, a regulatory thing of something we don't have that has, people, is controversial. Casino gambling used to be, and now medical marijuana. So they're creating this regulatory framework for a new industry. There's also money for research by academic medical centers in this bill. So these things do take time.
Mary, so it's just not saying, okay, we're going to pass a medical marijuana bill. Here's who can dispense it. And you have the list of people. Physicians and several other categories of people, who can dispense it. But these are the conditions. For example, epilepsy, cancer, go through the condition. But then Robert's point is they're setting up a bureaucracy because you got to produce it, You got to manufacture it. And it's
Well, grow it. Hopefully there won't be manufactured marijuana.
That's true. I'm sorry, grow it.
Pennsylvania.
Very good correction. But go ahead, finish my thought there.
Well, yeah, it's just like you say, and like Robert was saying, there are going to be all these rules. The House bill spells out rules that are different than what the Senate proposed for dispensers, and I think they call them processors for the medical marijuana or cannabis, and it's a lengthy list of regulations, and I think there would be people who would say even with all those proposals there are even some things that haven't been thought through, so add some more to that. So
now 23 states have done this, and I guess the District of Columbia, that's my last count, who knows, and I guess they've all had their Robert, they've weighed in, lawmakers, the governor, the voters want it. We know that. It's overwhelming. The Pennsylvania Medical Society has been on this program. They have some concerns about things we don't know about the long-term use. They're doing their due diligence. So if you had to guess, is this going to be done within the next couple of months?
I think there's a fair assumption to be done along with the budget around that period of time in June. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, in the 2 weeks before the primary.
Yeah, I mean, my sense about this is there always seems to be something. Just when it moves, there are different ideas. I think there were over 200 amendments at one point to the proposal, and it's complicated, and everybody wants to weigh in.
But you see those. You see all those amendments usually when something's controversial, right? I mean, you see that.
Yeah, great point. Yeah.
I would just point out. I can remember. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. A bunch of us were sitting on your show, and medical marijuana was seen as this laughable thing. I mean, you had lumped it in with proposals, not big, and rightfully so. You had lumped it in with proposals that weren't going to see the light of day in the legislature. And just a few years later, this group of advocates, many of them parents with young children with seizures, debilitating seizures, have pushed this to the forefront. I remember last year I was reporting on these people, and they said, lobbyists told us it takes 5 years to pass a bill like this, and we said we don't have that kind of time. So they have tried to really compress the typical ping pong period that a bill would go through.
Now, I think a tipping point, and I'll bet you dimes to donuts that both of you were there, was that very emotional testimony in the Senate before a Senate committee when all of these, they brought in patients and family members talking about the hardships that these, they were going through, the pain and the suffering. And, you have conservative lawmakers, yes, not just liberal, right?
This, especially in the House debate, you saw this was crossing across ideological barriers of people who, from personal experience, from people they knew, cancer situations, yeah, epilepsy, all, talking about this. So this was an unusual dynamic for the legislature, right, especially these days.
Now, we have to get this out. You can't smoke this. Right, it's in the bill. Right. It's not weed. You can't go buy it and smoke it. Take off.
Right,
on that.
There are a number of kind of forms of marijuana that would be allowed, right, under these, under both proposals. And the House has said,
no
we
weed.
don't, yeah, no smokable
right?
form. Although you can vaporize it. So if it's a liquid or
this is all getting complicated, right? All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, the budget. The governor let the budget become law, at least about $7 billion of it. He vetoed a little more than that earlier in the, I guess late last year, right? He vetoed it. How are the schools faring? Are they getting the money? What are the problems that's creating in the 501 school districts? We'll get into that subject after this break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, now celebrating 100 years as the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program. Robert Swift and Mary Wilson, both reporters. They cover the Capitol and state politics. All right, Mary, schools in theory are getting their money, not as much as they've asked for. You would agree with that, I think. But there's still some recurring problems that aren't likely to get resolved very soon in the 501 school district. And, they vary in terms of the intensity and the severity of them, but talk a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the problems with the latest budget action is that although they've gotten their basic education funding, the rest of it, that would be budgeted in a year, and a little bit more, the Republicans would argue. Although they've gotten that, the governor vetoed a budget companion bill known as the fiscal code, right, which is kind of like a junk drawer of budget-related items.
How you spend the money, the technical stuff that a lot of us don't pay much attention to.
Right. And
you have to pay attention. Right. To. You and Robert, you're stuck. Go ahead. Yeah,
and one of the things in that fiscal code was money to reimburse schools for construction projects and completed building maintenance projects that the state had approved and said, we'll reimburse you for this.
And they've been paying for these all along.
Right. The borrowing that schools embark on to cover these costs, is spread over many, many years, and the state is on the hook for that. The state promises to pay that back. And so this year, because that money was in a fiscal code that had myriad problems from the governor's perspective, he vetoed it. So they call it Plan Con funding. That Plan Con funding won't come through for the schools. The governor says, it's kind of a long story, but basically the thumbnail version is that the governor says Republicans said this would be paid for by borrowing. The borrowing's going to be too expensive for the state. We're not going to do it.
So, Robert, also schools have paid, some, not all, have gone out and borrowed money, so they got interest payments. As Mary said, they're accruing additional expenses because of the construction.
There's an estimated $50 million in interest payments statewide of school districts, so that on the loans they took out. Now, they're not in the situation 2 weeks ago. Some were looking at closing in April. They're not in that situation, but just this week you're starting to see they're getting ready to do their own budgets which are usually due at the end of June. And you're starting to see some school districts. One, Penn Hills, talking about layoffs of 40 employees, of furloughs of teachers.
Still talking about furloughs.
And I thought that's what they were doing like in 2011, 2010,
right.
And then the Hazleton School District in the Northeast saying looking at cuts.
But Mary, why aren't we back here next year? Because the schools, Governor Wolf wanted basically about a 5% increase in school funding, if I understand that correctly, something in that range. The schools didn't get it. They've some of them raised property taxes. Why aren't we back here when you two are sitting with me in July talking about the same thing?
I guess I don't.
With the money, the schools are going to need money. They're arguing they didn't get enough money out of this year, even though they now got money, because it's not what they asked for or think they need. So are we going to have a continuing concern about school funding for the next couple of years?
Yeah.
You're looking at me like you have to ask that question. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of one of the things that's going on is that schools are kind of in the governor's corner,
right?
As are human services. So they don't want to shout too loudly, hey, this isn't good enough. And, if ever they have some problem with the way the governor is going about in negotiations for more, holding out for more. They don't want to criticize him too much.
They're trying not to criticize the governor, who's been one of their
champion.
Yeah.
Even if they have problems with the way he's been going about the negotiation.
Yeah. There's another thing about the taxpayers. If they could go for the property taxes, Robert, you've been covering this for decades. Property taxes are by far the most unpopular, right? Every poll, everything,
And they've been that way since the start of the school taxation in the 1830s.
And every time they try to shift from property to income and sales, again, both of you have been through these efforts, it produces winners and losers. So if I don't want to, some voters will say, well, I don't want to pay more income tax, you're just making me pay more. And then some people don't pay the income tax, you get it. So
I think, your recent poll showed that people in the state don't widely opposed to hiking the state income tax for any reason, for whatever schools, and yet they were more closely divided on the sales tax base. But with the school tax, property tax obviously was one of the elusive components of the budget fight last year. The House at one point amazingly passed a bill that would have shifted over to sales and income tax combination away from property taxes, and the Senate had their vote, which is still somewhat puzzling on the school tax elimination plan that failed by one vote. Right.
But Mary, long term, I'll let we'll end this segment with you. Long term, the schools want more money. The governor has requested more money. He's requested an increase in certain taxes to pay for it. We all agree there, particularly the severance tax. But as I look out into this arena in the state capitol, it doesn't look like no tax hikes. The budget next year will probably look a little bit like this year's budget, less than what the governor wants. Am I on Mars about that, or does it look like we're back to square one, where we were when the governor started?
Right, wherever you are, there you are. Yeah, wherever you go, there you are. And many reporters, there was this big day of a lot of news last week when the governor said, I'm going to let the Republican supplemental budget lapse into law, and a bunch of people said, and the Republican legislative leaders came out and they said, we're going to get right back to work on the next budget, which is due in 3 months, and we're going to work really hard to come to a consensus. And everybody goes, well, how have the fault lines here changed? And they
not
didn't
at
have
all.
an answer.
All right, thanks as always. Thanks for coming in. All right, Dave Patti joins me. We're going to do a primary election preview. Remember, April 26th. It's closer than you think.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania. working towards a healthy Pennsylvania. And by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit betterwithcoal.com.
Welcome back to the program. Dave Patti from the Pennsylvania Business Council joins me. Dave, we have some elections coming up here, right?
Whether we need them or not.
Whether we need them or not. Well, let's talk primary elections. Closed primary, Democrats can only vote for Democrats, Republicans in Republican primaries. Let's talk first of all about the presidential election here. We can go through the Democrats. This is a Hillary Clinton state. Let's be honest.
Right.
She's likely to beat Bernie Sanders. She leads by 20 to 30% percentage points in the polls. What do you think about that?
She did well in the state in 2008. This was her attempt at firewall anyway against Barack Obama in 2008. And yeah, it is a state, when you look at the demographics that she appeals to, it tends to be older voters, older women. Right. Well, this is a state that has plenty of those. And so while Bernie is in Pittsburgh this week and having a great rally with young people, and he's still getting attention, it's not going to be enough for him to win the state.
Yeah, and the other thing is we forget that she has a lot of connections and relationships in the Philadelphia area. Right. Governor Rendell, former Governor Rendell. And I like to point out that her dad was born in Scranton, played football for Penn State.
I did not know that.
See, and I joke and say if you played football for Penn State,
right,
you winner statewide. I'm just joking.
Yeah, well, it certainly seems to always be worth some points, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, the Republican race is a little more complicated. John Kasich has made a big move on Trump that had not an overwhelming lead with Cruz in third. Kasich has greater appeal, I think. Get into that a bit.
I mean, Kasich, being a governor from a neighboring state, being actually a native of Pennsylvania from McKees Rocks, he is much more like people we're accustomed to, like a Tom Ridge, who is now backing him. Like some other Pennsylvanians, before that people think of him as the moderate kind of Republican, a fiscal hawk, but not necessarily as staunchly conservative on some other issues, and pragmatic and able to work with legislative bodies. Yeah. So I think he's appealing to Pennsylvania voters. Donald Trump certainly has his supporters here as well, and then there are sort of traditional conservatives who who didn't go to Trump, who are sticking with Ted Cruz. But as so much has been written, Pennsylvania's different because the primary election itself isn't the same as voting for delegates.
Yeah, there's 71. We don't want to get too much into the weeds. The Republicans have 71 delegates. 54 of them are selected out of our 18 congressional districts. So when you go to vote, you're going to get to vote for.
Right, for 3 from your district, and there's nothing on the ballot that says here's who they're for.
Just their
names.
It
wouldn't matter if it did say what, because they can do anything they want. Only 17 will go to the winner of the statewide vote, the popular contest.
It's kind of a throwback to the old political boss days, I think. Someone once told me that.
Well, democratic process, small d, of keeping electors close to the people, and your friends and neighbors will make the choices.
Would it shock you if Kasich wins the state?
No, would not shock me. I think that he's surging here. Certainly, we've seen that in polling. You're polling and others. I think he, as I said, has the temperament and the position stance that a lot of people like. And frankly, the backlash recently against Donald Trump on abortion now and on some other things. Yeah.
His campaign manager, whether he.
It's hard to believe that Trump's going to do well with women voters, and they turn out in elections. So
that's right. The issue, just to get it out, was if you have not seen it, and I think you probably have, the Trump campaign manager grabbed the reporter by the arm as she was approaching Trump, and it's created quite a. But
I think a bigger stir is a more recent one, wherein he walked it back, but saying that women should be punished for having an abortion,
and pro-life groups don't even support that.
Pro-lifers didn't even like that, so that's going to be a problem for him.
I agree. So as we look nationally, the elections shift to the Northeast, correct?
Right.
So we've got Connecticut, New York, Rhode Island. That, in a sense, sort of gives Kasich, he's not going to win on the first ballot. He can't, but that's...
Right, he doesn't get to the 1237 that you need, but certainly one would think that the demographics of those states, the type of voters who come out in those states in primaries are more of his sort of voter than a Ted Cruz voter.
All right, let's run to a break, and then when we come back, I want to get into the Senate election, and we'll see where that all goes. It looks like Democrats are in a pretty tough primary. Pat Toomey runs unopposed, so we don't need to talk about that. We'll do the U.S. Senate Democratic primary in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
All right, let's quickly go to the United States Senate election. On the Democratic side, the nomination, I should point out, Pat Toomey, the incumbent, is running unopposed. We have three candidates: John Fetterman, mayor of Braddock, a small town out in Allegheny County; Joe Sestak, former admiral, former congressman, former candidate for the Senate; and of course Katie McGinty, worked for Al Gore, worked for Bill Clinton, worked for Ed Rendell, worked for Tom Wolfe. Go ahead.
Well, as a succinct rundown of the candidates, I mean, since Katie got into the race, and she was kind of recruited by the elites, the establishment, and this is not a year to be part of the establishment in either party.
Right.
If you look at the polling, and in fact your own polling, I'd say she's flatlined. I mean, her numbers have not grown whatsoever, whereas Joe Sestak continues to do better. Now, there's still a large part of the Democratic primary electorate that's undecided. So which way they go? In your polling, I noticed that they were the leaners were about evenly split.
But McGinty has a ton of money. Go ahead,
coming in from Emily's list, coming in from other outside sources, coming in from out of state. The Democratic Senate Campaign Committee in D.C., they have picked her in the primary. They're getting involved in this.
All right.
So she has millions of dollars for TV. Does it make a difference? I'm not sure that it does.
All right. Final question. It's still not out of the question that she can win.
Sure, she could win. You would think that a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters would be Katie McGinty supporters. So, yes.
Yeah, and she does look like she's running a campaign much akin to Hillary Clinton's now, going on a lot of women's issues, pay gap and all that stuff, right?
Correct. She's, in fact, running a commercial on the pay gap.
All right. Great update. We'll see you soon. All right. Thanks for watching this edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.